Paris, 1899. In the very heart of the Élysée Palace, within the gilded cage of French power, the night is shattered by a woman's blood-curdling scream. The thunder of footsteps echoes across floors polished to a mirror shine. Doors are thrown open, and the terrified servants are met with a scene destined to become the most infamous scandal in all of Europe. The President of the Republic, Félix Faure, is frozen in the embrace of eternity in a most compromising position. Beside him, a disheveled, half-dressed beauty, her hair entangled in the fingers of the head of state. This single moment, witnessed by a dozen pairs of eyes, will become far more than a newspaper sensation. It is the key to one of history's darkest and most tangled tales, where high politics, forbidden passion, and cold calculation are twisted into a single deadly knot. But who is she? This woman whose name will now be whispered in every salon from Paris to St. Petersburg. A fleeting favorite or a devil in an angel's guise, her beauty a mere cover for a heart of ice. History knows her as Marguerite Steinheil, but that is only one of the masks worn by a predator whose life is a labyrinth of secrets, with a new drama waiting around every turn. And the tragedy in the presidential office was merely a prologue to events far more sinister. We will follow in her footsteps and unravel this web of intrigue to understand how did the heiress of one of France's wealthiest dynasties transform into a femme fatale, a suspect in a monstrous crime? And how did she manage to fool all of Europe, taking her greatest secrets with her to the grave? To understand the scale of this woman, you must first understand the scale of her family. Forget the old aristocracy, with their crumbling castles and coats of arms collecting the dust of ages. The blood in Marguerite's veins did not carry the scent of ancient blue, but of machine oil and molten metal. She was the heiress of a new industrial aristocracy, the Japy dynasty, titans who forged their fortune not on the battlefield, but in the thundering workshops of their factories. At the time of her birth in 1869, the Japy family's capital was the second largest in all of France. This wasn't just money, it was power. Power to move politics, to change cities, and to determine the fates of thousands. Their name was synonymous with progress, and this leviathan of steel and gears seemed eternal. The clan's history dates back to the 16th century, to solid, prosperous peasants who stood firm on their land. But the true legend began in the mid-18th century, with the birth of a man destined to turn the gears of family history toward unprecedented prosperity. Our heroine's great-great-grandfather, Frederick Japy, was born in 1749. He was no dreamer or adventurer. He was a genius of engineering and commercial calculation. Blessed with an excellent education thanks to his family's wealth, he traveled to Switzerland, to the very heart of the watchmaking world, to master its most guarded secrets. In those days, a watch was a luxury, a bespoke work of art, available only to kings and nobles. Each mechanism was assembled by hand, its creation akin to composing a symphony. Frederick returned from Switzerland with more than just new knowledge. He returned with the key to a revolution. For a pittance, he bought several brilliant but undervalued inventions from his mentor, machines and tools that would allow for the mass production of timepieces. It was a move that changed everything. Returning home, he opened his own manufactory, where the quiet, meditative labor of the lone master was replaced by the rhythmic hum of machinery. Watches ceased to be an exclusive marvel. They became affordable. Their prices plummeted and demand soared. Frederick Japy, in essence, democratized time, placing it on the wrist of the common bourgeois. His factories grew at an astonishing rate. He constantly introduced new technologies, and by the beginning of the 19th century, he passed on to his three sons not just a business, but an industrial empire. Under the next generation, the Japy Empire expanded even further. They thought bigger than just watch movements. Their factories began producing everything the new era demanded, from water pumps that supplied growing cities to typewriters that accelerated the pace of business. The range of products was enormous, the quality impeccable. The family business survived until 1979, enduring revolutions, empires, and world wars. Marguerite was born at the absolute zenith of this power. She grew up in a world where any whim was fulfilled at the snap of a finger, where money was not a goal but a given, as natural as the air she breathed. She was the princess of this industrial fairy tale. But, as is so often the case, the golden cage proved too confining for her restless soul. The foundation of this industrial empire, however, cracked where no one expected it, in matters of the heart. Marguerite's father, one of the heirs to the Japy clan, committed an act unthinkable for his circle. He began an affair with a simple innkeeper's daughter. The affair, which the family tried to hush up, ended in an unequal marriage that forever poisoned his relationship with his powerful relatives. It was in this atmosphere of cold family schism and limitless wealth that Marguerite grew up. Like her three siblings, she received a brilliant education. She knew languages, music, and manners. But beneath the polished veneer, the soul of a rebel was stirring, one that had inherited her father's contempt for convention. At 17, she made her debut in society. Like an exotic butterfly, she began to flutter from one ball to the next, instantly captivating everyone with her beauty and sharp wit. It was at one such ball, held at the local garrison, that her heart first stirred. She fell in love with a young officer, a friend of her brother's, and they began a passionate but doomed romance. For the Japy family, an officer without a grand name or fortune was a completely unsuitable match. Her parents, taught by their own bitter experience, decided to nip the affair in the bud. There were no dramas, no scandals. They acted with the cold calculation of industrialists fixing a flaw in a mechanism. Marguerite was simply sent away under the supervision of her older sister into a kind of honorable exile, in the hopes that provincial boredom would cool her ardor. But they had gravely miscalculated. In snatching her from one flame, they cast her directly into another, far more dangerous one. It was there, far from home, that she met the man who would define her destiny, the artist Adolphe Steinheil. He was the complete opposite of her first love. He was not young, 19 years her senior, with the aura of a melancholic failure and empty pockets. His paintings didn't sell. Fame passed him by. But he had one undeniable advantage. He lived in Paris. For Marguerite, suffocating in the provinces, that city was the symbol of freedom, glamour, and real life. She became his lover, and soon, after her father's death in 1888, his legal wife. They married in 1890. A year later, she gave birth to their only daughter, Marthe, and with that, the illusion of domestic bliss came to an end. The passion, if it ever truly existed, faded as quickly as it had ignited, leaving behind only the ashes of mutual interest. But they had no intention of divorcing. Instead, they forged an unspoken but solid business pact. Their Parisian home was transformed into a fashionable salon, and on its stage, Marguerite played her greatest role. She was the hostess, the muse, the socialite. And out of boredom, as she herself would later admit, she began to collect affairs with powerful and famous men. Adolphe pretended not to notice, and he had good reason to. He was a mediocre artist. Without patrons, he would have faced obscurity and poverty. Marguerite, meanwhile, flitting from one embrace to the next, turned her charm into her most valuable asset. Her intimacy with the powerful politicians, financiers, aristocrats was converted into lucrative commissions for her husband. She did not forget her husband, providing him with work and money. It was a perfectly tuned system, a symphony of cynicism and convenience, where each partner got what they wanted. She got the freedom and glamour of the capital. He got the opportunity to create without worrying about bills. And everyone was happy for a time. One day, into the skillfully laid nets of Marguerite fell prey of a special caliber. This was not just another wealthy patron or a bored aristocrat. This was Félix Faure, a politician with an iron grip and tireless ambition, who at the time held the post of Minister of the Navy. An imposing, charismatic man, he was the embodiment of the Third Republic's success. The son of a simple furniture maker, he had inherited no titles or fortunes, achieving everything on his own, first as a brilliant merchant and industrialist, and then as a rapidly rising star in the political firmament. Their secret affair began around 1894, and it was not a mere flirtation, but an alliance of two predators, equal in strength, each seeing the other as a tool to achieve their own ends. For her, he was a ticket to the very top, into the world of great power. For him, she was a glittering trophy and a respite from the tedious affairs of state. And then the unexpected happened. In 1895, as a result of political intrigue and a surprising turn of events, Félix Faure became the President of France. Their romance now acquired a completely different status, dangerous and intoxicating. Marguerite Steinheil had become the secret mistress of the nation's first man. Their meetings became a complex game of conspiracy. They saw each other in secluded corners of Paris and at country residences, but their most audacious and favored rendezvous spot was the Élysée Palace itself. The president's own office, the very heart of the French nation, became their love nest. To avoid suspicion, a cover story was invented. Madame Steinheil, an intelligent and educated woman, was assisting the head of state with his personal correspondence and paperwork. Under this respectable pretext, she would walk past the guards and find herself in the center of power, alone with its ultimate master. Of course, the president had an official family. His wife, Berthe Faure, was a model of devotion and love. She adored her husband, considering him a genius and the ideal man, and in all their years of marriage, she never suspected his numerous intrigues. She lived in blissful ignorance, creating a comfortable and respectable home for him while he risked his reputation and career in the arms of Marguerite. According to some rumors that circulated actively in the Parisian salons, Faure was so infatuated with his mistress that he seriously considered divorcing his wife to marry her. It is difficult to say how true these speculations were or what was really going on in the soul of this calculating politician. Perhaps he was merely stroking Marguerite's ego, or perhaps he truly was ready to gamble everything for this forbidden affair. The answer to that question would remain a secret he took to his grave. The drama reached its climax on February 16th, 1899. It had been a difficult day, full of political battles and exhausting meetings. That evening, seeking rest and relaxation, the president summoned his secret assistant for another session of work on his papers. In anticipation of their meeting, as malicious tongues would later whisper, he took a potent dose of a tonic, a popular aphrodisiac of the era. What exactly happened next within the walls of the presidential office is known only from Marguerite's own account. But at some point, their tryst was interrupted by her desperate scream. When servants and guards rushed to the sound, they found a shocking scene. The President of France lay unconscious, dressed only in a waistcoat, his fingers clenched in a death grip in Madame Steinheil's magnificent hair. According to one version, he was already dead. According to another, more charitable account, he passed away a short time later in the arms of his devoted wife, who, to the very last moment, never understood the true cause of her great husband's sudden demise. A hairdresser had to be summoned to cut a lock of Marguerite's hair, freeing her from the president's final embrace. And so the story ended, not with a period, but with a thick, scandalous blot on the reputation of the entire nation. The official version of events, of course, was dry and decorous. President Félix Faure had passed away suddenly from an apoplectic stroke. Newspapers were printed with black borders. The nation mourned the loss of its leader, and politicians delivered grand speeches about his contribution to the glory of France. But behind this official facade, in the drawing rooms of Paris, in cheap cafes and expensive restaurants, a completely different narrative was boiling over. The invisible but all-powerful grapevine spread the salacious details of the president's last night through the city with incredible speed. The story of the paperwork, the waistcoat, the fingers tangled in her hair, and the clipped lock of hair became a dark, cynical, and obscene urban legend. There were caricatures, pamphlets, and scathing verses. The name Marguerite Steinheil was on everyone's lips. By all laws of logic and public morality of the time, such a scandal should have destroyed her. She should have become a pariah, an outcast, a branded woman from whom all decent people would turn away. She should have vanished, fled Paris, hidden herself away in the provinces to bear her cross of shame for the rest of her days. But Paris, at the end of the 19th century, the brilliant and corrupt fin de siècle, played by its own twisted rules. Instead of fading into obscurity, Marguerite instantly became the most famous woman in France. She was not just a participant in the scandal, she was its high priestess, the living embodiment of forbidden fruit. Her name became shrouded in myth. Her image acquired an aura of dangerous and alluring mystery. In the eyes of society, she was no longer just a beautiful courtesan. Now, she was the woman in whose arms the president himself had breathed his last, and a queue began to form at her door. It was a queue of men for whom her new reputation was not a deterrent, but the ultimate magnet. Men who were famous, wealthy, powerful, and most importantly, as her contemporaries wryly noted, incredibly brave. To possess her now was not just to spend a night with a beautiful woman, It was an act of self-affirmation, a challenge to society, a chance to touch a legend. What did they see in her, this 30-year-old predator? The traces of a turbulent life already beginning to show on her face. Perhaps it was the very adrenaline they lacked in their jaded existence. She was a walking scandal, living proof that behind the glossy facade of respectability lay dark passions. Her salon became a site of pilgrimage, and her collection of names acquired new, even more illustrious trophies. Among them was René Lalique, the genius of jewelry design, a poet of glass and metal, a man who transformed ordinary objects into Art Nouveau masterpieces, creating his famous perfume bottles and exquisite ornaments. Perhaps he saw Marguerite as a similar creation, perfect and perilous, a living embodiment of the sensual flowing lines of his era. Beside him in her living room, one could find Jules Massenet, the celebrated composer whose operas Manon and Werther drove all of Europe to distraction. He, more than anyone, knew how to convey the intensity of passion and the tragedy of love in music. He likely drew inspiration from Marguerite's story, seeing in her a ready-made heroine for his next drama. The famous poet François Coppée, whose sentimental verses made sensitive young ladies weep, also sought solace in her arms. And of course, the list would not be complete without the great chronicler of human vice, Émile Zola, the author of Nana and the Lady's Paradise. He understood the mechanics of Parisian life and the nature of the courtesan better than anyone. For him, Marguerite was not just an object of desire, but priceless material for study, a walking novel being written by life itself. It is hard to imagine a more fertile subject for a naturalist writer dedicated to exposing the sores of society. But the apex of her collection was a true exotic, King Sisawath of Cambodia. This monarch from a distant Asian land, upon arriving in Paris, was captivated by rumors of the fatal Frenchwoman and wished to partake of the legend himself. Thus, the fame of Marguerite Steinheil crossed continents, transforming her from a provincial heiress into an international phenomenon. She was on top of the world, basking in the glow of her scandalous fame, not yet knowing that what lay ahead was not just another scandal, but an abyss of true horror. But this was not the finale. The story of Marguerite Steinheil seemed to be written by a mad playwright who, after each climax, simply raised the stakes. Society gossip was about to be replaced by a crime report. In the spring of 1908, nearly a decade after the drama at the Élysée Palace, Paris was shaken by news of a new, even more sinister event, with her name once again at its center. In the very same house on the Avenue de Villiers, where her famous salon had been held for all those years, a double tragedy occurred. The bodies of her husband, the artist Adolphe Steinheil, and her own mother, who had come for a few days' visit, but by a twist of fate had stayed to meet her end, were discovered. The scene that greeted the police was bizarre and chilling. Adolphe had been strangled. His mother-in-law, the elderly Madame Japy, had apparently become an unwanted witness. She had been gagged and had suffocated on her own dentures. But the most peculiar detail of this grim scene was the lady of the house herself. Marguerite was discovered in her bedroom, as naked as Eve, lying on her bed. She was bound, but so loosely, so carelessly, it seemed almost for show. The ropes were draped over her so lightly that she could have freed herself with no effort. She was conscious, feigning shock and horror, and immediately recounted to the investigators a harrowing tale of a nighttime attack. According to her, 4 robbers had broken into the house, 3 men and a woman in red, and had committed this monstrous deed. From the very beginning, her story fell apart at the seams. The police who arrived at the scene immediately noted a host of inconsistencies that turned the robbery narrative into a poorly staged play. First, Marguerite herself. She claimed to have been brutally beaten, but doctors found nothing on her body but a couple of minor scratches. No bruises, no abrasions, nothing to indicate a desperate struggle for her life. Second, the point of entry. The front door was locked from the inside. There were no signs of a break-in at the windows or any other part of the house. Moreover, it had rained heavily that night, turning the streets of Paris into a muddy mess. Yet, on the gleaming parquet floors of the Steinheil home, there was not a single dirty footprint, as if the robbers had flown through the air or had meticulously wiped their feet on the mat. The most damning piece of evidence against the robbery theory was that the assailants had somehow ignored valuables left in plain sight. Expensive trinkets, silver and jewelry remained untouched in the rooms. Instead, according to Marguerite, several pieces of her family jewelry and a sum of money were missing. And here, the thread began to unravel. A short time later, a well-known Parisian jeweler, having received a description of the missing items from the police, came to the station himself. He reported that Madame Steinheil herself had brought him those very same jewels a few days earlier, asking him to melt them down as quickly as possible. It was a devastating blow. Marguerite was immediately arrested and placed in the Saint-Lazare prison. A long and torturous investigation began, which devolved into a complete circus. Under cross-examination, she behaved like a prima donna on stage. She constantly changed her testimony, got tangled in details, and prevaricated. When investigators cornered her with difficult questions, she would theatrically faint, demanding a doctor and rest. She tried to frame the staff, planting a pearl necklace on one of the servants, but that deception was also quickly exposed. Her entire demeanor was saturated with falsehood and theatricality. During the 300 days she spent in custody, the investigation became convinced of her involvement. The motive, in the detective's view, was simple and cynical. By the age of 40, her beauty had begun to fade, and with it, the stream of wealthy patrons. She needed to secure her future. Her tiresome and useless cuckolded husband stood in the way of a new advantageous marriage. A new lover, a rich widowed industrialist, was on the horizon. Her mother, most likely, was an accidental victim. Perhaps she had woken at the wrong moment and witnessed the murder of her son-in-law. Or perhaps she too had been a target, as her death would bring Marguerite a handsome inheritance. However, despite the obviousness of these conclusions, the prosecution had no direct, irrefutable proof of Marguerite's guilt. No one had seen her commit the crime. No one could prove she had not acted alone. And on this, the entire defense was built. The trial became the event of the year. The courtroom was packed. Reporters from all over Europe sent daily dispatches. The climax was her lawyer's closing statement, which lasted 7.5 hours. After this marathon of eloquence, the jury, having received no conclusive evidence, returned a verdict of not guilty. The mythical robbers were never found, and the case was forever closed. Later, a conspiracy theory emerged, suggesting that the real perpetrator was one of her high-ranking lovers, perhaps even from the house of Romanov, and that the entire spectacle was designed merely to divert suspicion from a figure whom justice would never dare to touch. But these were only conjectures. Marguerite Steinheil had once again walked away unscathed. The court's acquittal freed her from prison walls, but not from the stigma that was now permanently attached to her name. If, after the affair with the president, she had been merely a scandalous celebrity, her reputation now took on a truly sinister hue. In the eyes of society, she became the Black Widow, a woman who brought death to her men, a cold-blooded schemer capable of anything for money and freedom. The press in Europe and America, which had extensively covered the sensational trial, crafted her image as a demonic siren, and the doors of the Parisian salons, once wide open to her, now slammed shut. Her charms were fading, her beauty dimming under the weight of years and turmoil. To remain in Paris, in a city where every stone remembered her triumph and her shame, was unbearable. It was time for another most radical transformation. Marguerite made a decision worthy of an adventure novel. She vanished. Selling her house and possessions, she crossed the English Channel to foggy and prim England, a country where a person's past matters less if they have money and manners. She took a new, elegant name with an aristocratic air, Madame de Serignac. Under this guise, she began a new life, trying to stay in the shadows and avoid attracting attention. However, a thirst for fame and likely money gave her no peace. In 1912, she published a memoir, which instantly became a bestseller. The public, holding its breath, awaited sensational revelations, hoping to finally learn the truth about the night at the Élysée Palace and the bloody drama in her own home. But Marguerite was too clever to reveal her hand. Her recollections proved to be a masterclass in insinuation, half-truths, and omissions. She glided over the sharpest corners of her biography, presenting herself as a victim of circumstance, fatal love, and cruel destiny. She wrote vaguely of the double tragedy, sticking to the story of the robbers and adding no new details. The book satisfied the public's curiosity and earned her a handsome sum, but her greatest secrets remained unsolved. And then she made her final and most brilliant move. In 1917, in the midst of the First World War, this 48-year-old woman with a dark past and a dubious reputation managed to achieve what the prosecution had accused her of striving for. She made a brilliant match. Her husband was Sir Henry Scale Hart Baron, an English baron and wealthy landowner. How she managed this remains another mystery of her life. Perhaps the baron was unaware of the full details of her tempestuous youth, or perhaps, like so many before him, he was drawn to the aura of danger and mystery that surrounded this extraordinary woman. In any case, the former Madame Steinheil became Lady Baron, a respectable society matron. She lived with her husband for 10 years until his death in 1927. After that, she led the quiet and comfortable life of a widow, finally breaking with her past. She lived through 2 world wars and the changing of eras. She saw empires fall and new worlds born. She lived to a ripe old age, ending her days in 1954 at the age of 85 in a comfortable nursing home. What a restless woman! A woman who began her journey as the heiress to a vast industrial empire, became the mistress of a president, was suspected of a monstrous crime and ended her life as an English lady. Her entire family, all those venerable Japy industrialists, were worthy and respected people, pillars of society, and she alone, like a genetic glitch in a perfectly calibrated machine, lived a life that burned like a wildfire, leaving behind only ashes and unsolved mysteries. So who was she, this Marguerite Steinheil? Her story is a detective novel with the final, most crucial page torn out, the page that reveals the true culprit. Was she a cold-blooded monster in an angel's guise, a calculating puppet master who removed inconvenient people from her path to secure wealth and a new husband? Or was she a genius of survival, a woman taught from youth to wield her charms as a weapon who simply perfected that art to an absolute, terrifying degree? We will never know the answer, and therein lies her final, greatest victory. She outplayed them all. She was a living mirror of her time, the beautiful and corrupt Belle Époque, where behind the glittering facade of balls and exhibitions lurked the darkest passions and coldest cynicism. She absorbed this poison and learned to use it better than anyone else. Marguerite Steinheil was neither a saint nor a martyr. She was a predator, born in a golden cage, who broke free and turned the entire world into her hunting ground. Her life is not a tragedy or a comedy. It is a textbook on the art of survival, written in the language of intrigue, seduction, and perhaps blood. She outlived her lovers, her enemies, and her accusers, holding all the strings of this tangled game until the very end. Picture the scene: a quiet English garden, a respectable elderly lady in a chair, sipping her 5 o'clock tea. In her faded eyes, the reflection of an entire epic. In her memory, secrets that could shatter the reputations of great families and rewrite history books. And she alone knew the truth of what happened in the president's chamber and in her own home on that rainy night. She took that truth with her to the grave, leaving us with only the eternal question. Or perhaps, after living so many lives under so many names, she herself came to believe the version she told the world, and the real Marguerite dissolved forever into the myth she had created.